Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. I'm playing Nicola Capri 1968. My opponent opens with e4, and let's play a Caro-Kann here. I've been playing a fair amount of Caro-Kann lately, but you guys have requested it. I know many of you play it. So here we go again. We have one of these variations with a quick exchange on d5. It's pervasive below about 2,000 that you see this line, and probably even a little bit higher. So White played knight f3 early on and then instantly snapped off the pawn when it got to d5. Let's just develop here, and I'll be really curious if White plays c4 or not. White does play c4. Okay, so now we have this Panov variation, and I'm going to go knight f6, defend the pawn in the center. And after knight c3, I have a choice. A choice here. This is a critical line. A couple climbing the rating ladder videos ago, we saw a game where my opponent had the pawn on c2 with the knight in front of it, the so-called bad marriage. And here we have the good marriage with the pawn ahead of the knight. So bishop g4 is one of the moves I played in the past here. It's highly theoretical. There's a line after bishop g4, c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3. I can maybe show that in the analysis. I'm kind of not keen to enter some long theoretical line that often leads to an endgame. So I think I'm going to mix it up here. I'm just considering which line I want to play. I played g6 in the past in this position. Bishop e6 is actually rather interesting. I may play that one. Yeah, let's go ahead and play bishop e6. We'll reinforce the pawn on d5. Now, this move does look a little defective because I am blocking my e-pawn, but often black can fianchetto this bishop, and they can work around that. And the nice thing about this move is that I may just capture the pawn on c4 if allowed. Okay, so d takes c4 when the pawn is defended by the bishop is a potential threat. White won't be able to play bishop takes c4 against that. So I'm going to be curious what my opponent does here. A lot of times they play c5 in an instance like this. Okay, but white plays bishop e2, giving me the option of taking if I want to do so. And I think I will avail myself of that possibility. Now, one other thing we have to know is that we have d5 covered. So if d takes c4, d5 is not going to fork the two pieces successfully. I can play knight takes d5, or bishop takes d5 for that matter. Just making sure my recording looks good. All right, capture solid. We got sound. I'm always afraid I'm going to get deep in one of these videos and it's not recording. Just an old YouTube fear that I've had. Okay, so d takes c4. Again, I could think about this plan as well, but I'm really curious what White's going to do. I want to know, does White have a plan against this move? So let's go ahead and play it. I don't think White has to panic or anything. It's just a pawn. We're in the opening. White has pretty good development otherwise. So it's possible for White to castle, but it does beg the question, how are you going to get this pawn back? Or are we just going to be playing a gambit scenario? Okay, so White plays bishop e3, reinforcing the d-pawn. My instant thought about this is that although the bishop is wedged in here, I've warned about that in the past. I don't think it's the best type of post for the bishop. It might free up White's knight. White's knight may come to g5 in the future, attacking the bishop, which is in turn defending that c4 pawn. So if White could eliminate my light square bishop, they could threaten bishop takes c4. So it's not like this is a purposeless move. There's some ideas here. Candidate moves for me, h6 to stop knight g5. Puts an end to that for the moment. g6 if I want to continue developing, but I don't know how it addresses this move. Another move I really like the look of is this move knight d5. Hitting the bishop and the knight. Using some tactical means to prevent bishop takes c4, because if knight d5, bishop takes c4, I take e3 or c3 for that matter. And then I have the discovery. I don't know, though. If knight d5 and White simply castles, what do I really have? Rook c8 is interesting too. a6 maybe. I think of all these moves I've mentioned so far, I kind of like h6 the best. I know in the opening you may not want to play a move like that, but I think it actually makes quite a bit of sense here. So I'm going to go for it. Try to justify the position of my bishop on e6, guarding this pawn. And if possible, I may go g6 and bishop g7. Okay, and then instantly queen a4. I did see this possibility on the previous move as well. And White is threatening to take here. So a couple possibilities in reply. A6 to try to go b5. Maybe queen a5. Maybe even queen a5, offering a queen trade. But a6 is the move I'd like to play. I wonder if a6 runs into knight e5, though. Knight e5, intending b5, knight takes c6. So maybe queen a5, rather, is a better option here. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking so. Kind of thinking that might be the move. We could trade queens, maybe knight b5. I think I'm probably okay there, though. King d8 if I need to. Yeah, let's play queen a5. I'm behind on the clock, so I need to be mindful of that. Hopefully make up some time. Let's pre-move this capture just in case. My opponent playing very quickly here, putting the pressure on me on the clock while I'm blathering and trying to communicate exactly what's going on in my head. And hope everyone's doing well out there. It's Friday as I record this, Friday afternoon, so I'm getting ready for the weekend. A little bit tired today. It's been a pretty busy start to the year, just posting again on YouTube, teaching, the chess boom that's ongoing that we're all enjoying, including many of you. I think I've seen comments from people like, oh, I'm getting so many easy wins lately. So maybe some of you are taking down the new players coming to chess, which is fine because it's a rite of passage, right? Okay, rook d1. So I could trade queens here. Now, d5 does become more of a threat in some cases. But I could trade queens, and then I even have the option of b5 if I really want to solidify things. Yeah, how do I feel about that? Queen takes a4, knight takes a4, and then something like b5, or even bishop. How about this? Bishop d5 and e6. Ooh, that might be a nice way to unwind. I like the look of that, folks. Yeah, queen takes a4 is pretty appealing because I'm up a pawn, so stands to reason a queen trade, if white doesn't derive anything from that, should benefit me. So yeah, I'm kind of locked in on this, and then bishop d5. I think that solves a lot of my coordination issues too, enabling me to go e6 thereafter. Knight c5 I think is kind of toothless. I can play b6 against that. Let's do it. Let's play this. Yeah. Not too many tactics going on here, and I love the fact that I have b5 at a moment's notice. This b5 move. Maybe I should have looked at knight e5, seeing if this is playable for white. I do see that I have bishop takes g2, but this could be interesting because maybe white can argue that they have enough pressure on c6 and c4 to compensate. But okay, white goes knight c3, challenging the bishop. Logical move, but I'm pretty keen to play e6 here. And I'm happy if knight takes d5 is played because I get to take with my e-pawn and support that pawn on c4. Maybe bishop b4 will come into the picture in some cases if white refrains from taking on d5. So if knight e5 here, I could see myself playing this bishop b4 move because, well, is that true? Maybe not. I was thinking I was preventing a capture on c4 somehow, but that's not the case. I'm really only preventing knight takes d5. Knight e5 still looks interesting. I mean, that could be... White probably had to try their luck with that move. I'll be curious about that after the game. I probably had antidotes there, but I think that would have been a better option. Okay, so now white does castle. Maybe bishop d6, covering that e5 square once and for all. It does invite knight b5, but I can pull the bishop back to b8. I've got a6 on the way. Speaking of a6, I could play that immediately. Not going to take here. I like my bishop wedged in where it's at. Maybe knight g4 too. Bishop b4 again comes to mind, but I think I'd prefer to keep that dark square bishop if I could. So here, I would definitely play bishop d6 if knight b5 wasn't an issue. But I am just making sure that if I play this knight b5, bishop b8, that's okay for me. This is just a little bit loose. White could pivot back to a3, for instance. So, yeah, I'm not completely out of the woods here yet. I need to make sure I can support the c4 pawn. Need to make sure that we do that. Yeah, I'm actually thinking now maybe I should go bishop b4 and then try to eliminate this knight, because although I would prefer to keep the dark square bishop, I keep looking at this knight e5 possibility. keep looking at that. And also knight d2, by the way. Knight d2 could be a thing as well. And if a6, looking for b5, I just think knight e5 might be a good shot for white. Because if I play b5 at that point, knight takes d5, and you can see the looseness of c6. It's like I need one more move here to fully consolidate. That's sort of what I'm contemplating here. But bishop b4, let's say knight d5 or knight e2 is played. I can take c3. And I think that should be pretty solid. That should work out well. Rook c8, another move. Let's go bishop b4. I've thought about this enough. I'm still up the pawn. I'm trying my best to keep it. Let's play a natural developing move. I'm not absolutely keen to take the knight, again, parting with the bishop, even repairing white's structure to some degree, because this pawn becomes de-isolated. Is that a word? De-isolated? Unisolated? Okay, white takes on d5, though. I don't think this is a good idea. Again, I'm happy to take with the pawn, and this pawn on c4 is an annoyance. It's a definite annoyance for white. And now knight e5 comes, but as long as I don't take this knight and allow d takes e5, hitting my knight and the pawn on d5, if the knight moves, what does white really have to show here for the last couple moves? So probably castle. Bishop d6 kind of comes to mind too, but probably castle here. Castle short, that is. No reason to castle long here. That would be a big blunder in view of knight takes f7. Also, I want to calm this position down. I want to try to convert this gradually. Maybe rook c8 also makes some sense. But let's start with castles. I think no particular rush here in the position. Let's see if white takes or if white plays some sort of queenside pawn move. I'm kind of thinking white might want to stab with b3 somewhere. Stands to reason they'll also try to get these bishops active, so I wouldn't be surprised if something like bishop f3 is played, maybe bishop f4. For me, if I get a free move, I'm thinking rook e8, challenge the knight. Maybe I can expect an f4 reply if white really wants to prop up that knight. But I can play around it. I have an outpost myself on e4. This could require some careful handling whenever your opponent has a knight period in the position, but especially an outposted knight. You got to be cautious. If white takes and doubles my pawns, I'm not too torn up about it. I think that structure is plenty safe. It's hard for the light square bishop to get at the belly of the pawn structure. White can't easily attack c6. I do see some possibilities for b3 for white. Like maybe they could claim some compensation, like knight takes c6, b takes c6, b3. Trade on b3 and then try to attack the c pawn and the a pawn. But I think realistically only black can be better there. If white has compensation, it's more of the, trying to grit their teeth and defend type of compensation. Knight g4. Okay. Yeah, I don't think this is a good approach. I know I'm being a little skeptical here of white's play openly, but yeah, that move was not on my radar at all. It just doesn't seem like the direction you want to go here. There's not a whole lot happening on the king side. Probably I will trade. And I wonder if I should go f5 at that point. Maybe trying to work up to f4, but okay. Yeah, the d5 pawn becomes a little weak if I trade my knight, so I should bear that in mind. I could play knight e4 if I want to avoid the trade. But I'm thinking swap and then play like rook e8. Just play the rook there, bishop f3, rook d8, and go from that point. Yeah, why overcomplicate this? Let's just take. Again, I'm up the material, so I don't feel it's incumbent on me to try to do too much here. f5 is tempting. Very tempting move. Because sometimes there's a bishop trap idea. White has a couple retreat squares, but f5 here. But I might want to retain the option of playing f5 at a later time and just keep things compact. So that's why I'm thinking about this one instead. Yeah, it might be the more responsible move. There's also rook d8. Yeah, let's go rook e8, though, to start. Just taking the file. I don't think there's a lot of action that's going to happen down the file yet. But Nice to place it there. White does play bishop f3, taking aim at this. And now rook d8, I think, is going to be on the way. Yeah, let's play it. And I think the next step here, guys, is to move my bishop back. Maybe bishop all the way back to f8, which is a nice aspect of having played rook e8, vacating that square. And I can try to start advancing on the queen side using my 4 versus the 3, the majority. Now, in terms of further trades, we've had some swaps here. I would love to swap dark square bishops if I could. If I could swap dark square bishop for dark square bishop at some point in the future and white's pawn on d4 remains isolated, that would be a great outcome for me. I would avoid any sort of opposite color bishop situation that could happen. And I can lean on this weakness in the future. So I may look for an opportunity to play that way. So rook c1. So I think white has their eye potentially on a move like this. This comes to mind. Take bishop to d2. That actually seems pretty interesting to me. I do slightly repair their structure, though, in playing that way. And I'm getting a little on the clock here. So let's just play the bishop f8 move I mentioned. Yeah, let's bring that back. I can support my pawns with b5 if needed. a3 is played. Yeah, I think I will go b5 here. I like the look of that. Support this. I'm slightly weakening the knight, but I see no way white can really take advantage of that, so no big deal. If white moves the b pawn, b3, I can take on a3. So I think the last few moves have been a positive development for me, especially this a3 move. Unlikely white's going to get this in the future. Okay, but they go b4. Yeah. Now, I don't want to take en passant. Sorry, anarchy chess, because I lose my knight. So no en passant right now. I think a5 is probably what I'm going to do here. Let's play it. Lean on this pawn. And look at this. If white plays b takes a5, which is the only realistic way to avoid losing this pawn, I have a nice couple of options, right? Like I can play simply knight takes a5, but also I think bishop takes a3 is looking nice. Bishop takes a3. I hit the rook. I have b4 on the way. That's a beautiful little structure there. 2 connected pawns screaming down the board. Okay, white plays that, but that has multiple issues. d4, b4 hanging. Let's take this one first. Gain a little time here. There's a 5-second increment. I don't feel like my time management has been that bad. But yet again, I'm in a situation with 30-some seconds on my clock. Yeah, so I think any capture is good here. Knight takes d4 appeals to me, though, because regardless of which pawn I'm going to take, the other pawn remains weak. And this is a capture with a threat on the bishop. I also have maybe knight e2. Knight b3 is in the picture as well. So we're just cleaning up here. I think bishop d1 is a likely move at this point. White tries to avoid a trade. But I like this knight e2 option now. I think knight e2 is a nice, tidy way to play this. Force the swap. That's a fork on the king and the rook. Let's pre-move the capture, get our few bonus seconds here. Always good to play with increment, guys. I'll keep reminding you. And where's that bishop going to go? It's under attack. Probably white's going to defend it. Rook d1. Rook e1, but that drops the bishop. Yeah, rook e1, we play rook takes d2. And this is game over. White does resign. All right. Thanks to my opponent for the game. Yeah, always appreciate people playing me. I know it's a big rating difference. I don't play under an anonymous account or a speedrun type account, guys. I've always done my climbing the rating ladders this way. It's just my preference. Other streamers may do it differently, which is totally fine. But I like it. If I were the person playing me in one of these games, I would like knowing who I'm facing, you know? So that's why I just play on my normal account. The only slight issue is it's sometimes hard to find players. And I think the chess.com algorithm doesn't like it when you get paired up or down a huge amount. So, because I notice sometimes when I click on, I just go to the open seek and I try to, the open seek graph, and I try to click on games. A lot of times chess.com prevents me from playing people. And my opponent said thanks for the game. So They're very nice. Hopefully they see this. Okay, so before we click into the analysis, let's try to have a couple points for our self-reflection and things that we can check with the computer when we add it. Very important to draw some conclusions before you click that baby on or click into the game review. So yeah, this position is theory, this Panov variation. Again, with the happy marriage, pawn on c4, knight on c3 behind. And bishop e6, this is an offbeat move, a little more advanced, I'd say. A lot of times a move like that is going to hurt you in many openings. There's certain lines where you straight up can't get away with this. It'll lead to a big disadvantage. But I happen to know that this is one line where this is playable. Bishop g4, I'd say, is the most principled move here. Also, e6 is played a lot, by the way. I didn't even mention that move, but that might even be more popular than bishop g4. We'll take a look. But yeah, as played, I was pretty happy to capture this pawn. I think the next few moves are pretty critical for white. I think they're critical to the evaluation of whether white can get compensation for this pawn. So white has to have probably a little more urgency than they had in the game. Like even bishop e3. I don't know that white can afford to play that move because d4 is already defended. I wonder if something a little more aggressive was in order. Knight g5 would have been interesting, by the way, at this point. Immediately going after the bishop. I did see that I can take on d4 then with the queen, but I kind of wonder if knight takes e6, wrecking my structure, will give white good compensation for 2 pawns. So we'll check that out. I'm pretty sure there's going to be games in this line. So bishop e3, h6, I mean, maybe white can argue that bishop e3 is fine because I didn't play a developing move at that point. I just made sure that knight g5 could be played. But queen a4 I was pretty happy to see in view of this queen a5 reply. Yeah, I was thrilled to trade queens. But then the more I thought about like this position here, this position, and I think even as late as this one, like I think knight e5 should have been a strong consideration for white. White played that move coming up, but only after the trade on d5. I think knight e5 somewhere around here. Let's say after e6. Would have been pretty interesting because it threatens on c4 a couple times. I'm not in a position to play b5 for a couple reasons. I mean, here, there's knight takes b5, but there's also knight takes d5, and then this knight is loose. So what do? I can play bishop takes g2. I maybe would have tried to make that work, like bishop takes g2, rook g1, bring the bishop back. But then white could recover at least a pawn there, taking on c4. The position's a little more open. So, yeah, I'll be curious what the engine says. I think by the time we get around here, yeah, the knight g4 move, I didn't like it. I think by the time we get around here, black's advantage is undisputed, and it's a stable advantage. I haven't had to incur any weak pawns, king safety issues, nothing like that that white can point to as compensation for the missing pawn, missing c pawn. Yeah, white has the bishop pair, but it's not a very effective bishop pair. This bishop, again, is a big pawn sitting here between f2 and d4. So I don't know, maybe bishop d7 was a possibility. It's possible that white has some compensation here, maybe with b3. I think I mentioned this, trying to attack the c and the a pawns. White has a weakness here, but I think I have some work to do in this position still. I'd say clearly better for black, but could be a long conversion. So I think if I were to offer my opponent advice, it's to think more carefully and use their time spending trying to find ways to seek more dynamic compensation when they've given up a pawn like that. Like they played a little too routinely. Castles, the bishop e3 move very early on, trading on d5, like quite cooperative, allowing me to connect my pawns together, multiple moves with the knight just to trade it. So a bit too routine. And you never know. This could have to do with my rating or whatnot, but that's not unexpected at this rating level. This player is in the low to mid 1300s. Decent rating. A lot of times these players aren't making blunders, but every rating is a decent rating, by the way. I don't want to imply that you're not a decent chess player or can't appreciate this game just because your rating is lower, but I basically mean that this is a solid rating where people aren't making major mistakes most of the time, like on, every 2-3 moves. They're not going to be making tactical mistakes. So while their game might be tactically more solid, there will still be tons of little things that they're doing wrong. And I think you saw that in this game with some of the decisions that were a little too casual for white. That didn't like kill them, but they add up to not enough compensation for a pawn here, and then a swift decline. Yeah, b4. This looks like a bit of hope chess to me, hoping that I take en passant here and blunder my knight, because b4, unfortunately, is just not a good move because I have this a5 move undermining, immediately overwhelming this mini chain. And if b takes a5, I have a nice choice. I thought this might happen, but it didn't. I probably would have played bishop takes a3 here, gone after the rook, and then I can try to scoop this up later. Could still be a little tricky, though, because I can't immediately go after that pawn with my rook, let's say, because the bishop takes d5. So let's say something like this had happened. I support the bishop by moving my pawn up. I have to take some care to pick this up, again, because I don't want to allow this. That would be trouble. That might completely reverse things. So I'd probably play something like rook e7 here, bring the rook over, take the pawn. Okay, let's see what the engine thinks. Again, I cannot stress how important it is to draw some conclusions on your own before you click any automated game feedback and before you look at the engine in general. You should not be clicking into the automatic feed. If there's one thing I'm going to keep hammering into your heads over and over in both my standard games and these climbing the rating ladder games, it's that. Like, trust me, you want to have a few things in mind to analyze, or better yet, even annotate your games. Put them somewhere where you can save them, like a Lee chess study, and look back on the games. Okay, so 81.8 accuracy for my opponent, 95.3 for me. Yeah, I just see this line so often. Those of you who play Caro-Kann below 2,000, like, let me know. I mean, I think we've already talked about this in the comments, but people just fire off knight f3, and then as soon as the pawn hits d5, they just chop it. They just chop it, and you get this position. I'm not saying this is terrible for white. We're still in book, but I just feel the speed at which this is played, to me, indicates that white is like not adjusting their opening repertoire for what black is playing. Like, probably this player plays knight f3 against e5. Probably they play that against the Sicilian as well, and maybe even the French, because I know you French defense players see a lot of this as well. Knight f3, and then as soon as the pawn hits d5, it's like, bang, chop the pawn, and you get these exchange variations. So I just think if you play that way from the white side, you might want to think about opening up your horizons, considering other lines that you can play. There's plenty of variations, especially if you start with d4 on move 2, which I think is the best move. And then after d5, you can push. That's the advanced variation. You can play knight c3 or knight d2. Those are main lines as well. The kind of the underrated option, I think, of the three options when there's early pawn tension, which is defend the pawn rather than always thinking you have to push or take. All right, because most amateur players just push or take. They don't think of that third option like developing and defending. So if you see elements of what white was doing here in your game, maybe consider looking into different lines and, most importantly, slowing down a little bit. So we get this trade. Yep, both sides just developing here. c4, knight f6. I think these last couple moves for black are more or less interchangeable. Some people play a very quick bishop g4. I personally don't like to do this. I don't like committing the bishop out there. I don't think it's a mistake, though. But I think the knight moves are always a little more flexible because you're almost certain your knights are going to go to f6, c6. But your bishop may want to go to f5 or even a square like e6, as you saw in this game. So don't feel like you have to get in the pin like, oh, the knight's out. We got to pin them. We got to pin them immediately. No, it's not like that. So, all right, knight c6, c4, knight f6, knight c3. And let's just click into the opening book here. Yeah, the Panov variation. And just looking at the possibilities at this point, let's shrink the webcam. Bishop g4 is the main move. Oh, interesting. So g6 is actually played more often at master level compared to e6. E6 is a pretty classical move. I've never been a big fan of the e6 approaches, though. You've probably seen from my games, I like it when my light square bishop can get out in these positions. I don't like locking it in voluntarily. That is the downside, but undoubtedly that's a solid move. But yeah, bishop g4, if you play this variation and your opponent you think is decent, be ready because c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3. This leads to a lengthy line. This hits the knight and also the pawn. And the main line of this variation goes bishop takes f3, g takes f3, e6, defending the knight, allowing queen takes b7, and now knight takes d4, reestablishing material equality. Bishop b5 check. You can see every game to reach this position has gone bishop b5 check. Knight takes b5, and then guess what? White's mostly not going to take back immediately. Okay, the main move here is queen c6, in between check, because if queen d7, black would drop the rook on a8. So king e7, queen takes b5, yeah, queen d7, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. I think there's even been a reevaluation of this line over the years, but this is a notorious endgame here. You wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel and figure this sequence out if you play bishop g4 on move 6. So I will say this endgame is probably drawish, but yeah, suffice it to say, know what you're doing if you play bishop g4 here. Now, this is interesting to me because the automatic feedback says bishop e6 is dubious. But if we look at the percentages, out of 186 games, black is actually scoring. Let me adjust my camera again. Black is actually scoring very well here. 42% wins for black, 18% wins for white, 40% draws. So statistically, decent sample size too. Black's doing pretty well on this bishop e6 move. But I guess the engine doesn't like it so much. Yeah, and now oftentimes white plays c5 or bishop g5. So on c5, this does take away any d takes c4 possibilities. I probably would have gone g6. You can also think about sending the bishop to g4. It looks like that's been played in 9 games. I think that does stand to reason. So saying, all right, now I'm not going to be able to threaten d takes c4, so let's just make sure that I can send the bishop somewhere more useful. Threatening bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, knight takes d4 in a lot of cases, also maybe e6. But not uncommon that black would play this g6 move, get the bishop fianchettoed. Looks like there's a fair amount of games here. And knight e5 coming in, attacking here, bishop d7. Just following one of the more popular lines. Castles, rook e1. Black has the bishop pair, but white has a strong outposted knight and probably a better pawn structure too, because the c6 pawn looks a little sketchy. So yeah, that's probably one of the stronger possibilities. Bishop g5, I think I faced this before too. Yeah, this can lead to some interesting stuff. g6 and knight e4. So this is kind of curious. So g6 almost looks like a straight up losing move, right? Or suspicious move, let's say. Take. But fortunately for black, they have enough defenders here. And I think I had this in a game one time. Yeah, bishop takes on d5. I think someone played queen e2 against me. And you just have to know to block. I don't recall which way I actually blocked here. Knight e7 or bishop. Might have been knight e7, actually. And then I sent the bishop out this way and tried to castle. So g6, although it looks a little sketchy on the d5 square, is actually playable here. But yeah, again, don't want to be stumbling into these lines, not knowing what you're doing. Knight e4, interesting move, counterattacking move too. Oh, note that we do not want to take on c4. I think this is what I was meaning to mention as far as like potentially losing moves. If you take on c4 here, white can play bishop takes f6. And then if we take with one of the pawns, now d5 is working. Okay, that is a fork. And the knight and the queen defend. Black doesn't have enough attackers on the d5 square, so black's going to lose a piece for a pawn. So that is the tactical point behind bishop g5. Like it indirectly prevents d takes c4 because of that line. But white played bishop e2. There are a few games here with that move, but let's just see what the engine thinks about it. Yeah, the engine like c5, queen a4, c takes d5. Can't imagine this is going to be that great of an idea. Like maybe white can obtain some compensation, but again, they have to have a sense of urgency here. Let's click back to the opening explorer. Yeah, bishop e3, and now we're officially out of book. There's a few games with castles. A few games where white castles here. And what does black do? g6, knight d5, queen d7. Yeah, g6 looks pretty natural. Okay. Just kind of curious how a game like this might develop. Bishop g5. Again, that threatens to take and then play d5. So, yeah, knight d5. Rook c1. Interesting. Bishop g7. Knight takes d5, and then bishop takes c4. Okay, recovering the pawn. That might be like a best case scenario for white. If they get the pawn back, I would still slightly prefer black here because white has this isolated pawn. So I would definitely prefer to play black in this middle game. But yeah, that might be a more on-the-ball response for white, adjusting to the fact that they're down a pawn after d takes c4. That being said, like bishop e3 is the second move here, and it doesn't drop the eval by much, but I kind of sense like white just didn't quite have a sense of urgency here. I don't know, though. Maybe h6 isn't the best reply. Not in the top three moves here. It's saying bishop d5 right away, knight d5. It's probably a good point, because if you just told me that you could have this position here and white gets to play something seeking compensation, and then we fast forward a move and I say, all right, what if I insert bishop e3 and h6? Does white still have compensation or even more chances for compensation than the previous line? It'd be hard to argue that h6 is more useful than bishop e3, a developing move. But I was kind of focused on trying to prevent knight g5. Okay, so queen a4. It says this is okay, so I wonder what it's going to say after queen a5. Okay, so at this point, queen a5, it's sort of oscillating here. Rook c1, queen takes a5, knight takes a5, knight e5. Yeah, probably based on how the game went, it would make sense for, just make this a little bit bigger. It would make sense for white to send my knight over to the side of the board, because white had to waste time with their knight in the game, taking the queen and then coming back to c3, right? So they probably would prefer to sideline my knight for a little bit, yeah, and then play this knight e5 move. And even though this pawn is safe, I undeniably have some coordination problems still. If I go bishop d5 here, white can take it at minimum and then capture here. Looks like there's even other moves, knight b5, playing for an attack. So yeah, knight e5 does make sense here. Maybe like g5, bishop g7, or g6, bishop g7. But interesting play ahead. It's a little quirky for both sides. Okay, so instead, white did not trade queens. They played rook d1. I was pretty happy to trade. This looked good. And now I played bishop d5. The engine also points out b5. b5, knight c3, knight d5. Okay, can't say I considered that. And I suppose the idea is if here, probably it's going to want me to, I don't know what, maybe rook b8? Yeah, rook b8. But if bishop takes c4, is there some tactic? Knight takes e3? Uh-huh. Knight takes e3, hit the rook, hit the bishop. And apparently this is good for me because this is a little bit loose. Yeah, I wasn't calculating that at all. Bishop d5 looks a lot more normal. So that is what I opted for. It looks solid having the bishop there, and then I have e6 on the way. Yeah, and it might be getting borderline too late for white to claim compensation. They're probably going to be a little worse here. The engine is suggesting rook c1. Because rook d1 didn't do a whole lot for white. It's not like they need the further defense of the d-pawn. So some of these moves are too generic to challenge black. So what about knight e5 at this point? This is a move I mentioned. Okay, the engine doesn't like it. It's saying bishop takes g2, rook g1, and then just bring this back. Okay. I still feel like this would have given white more chances than the game, where there wasn't any imbalance white could really point to. It was just I was up a pawn on the queen side with no structural issues, nothing. Here, at least, white has the half-open g-file. I'm probably going to be thinking twice about castling in the future. If ever I'm in a position to do that, I might run into bishop takes h6. Castling queenside could be a little sketchy too. The c4 pawn remains loose. It's not like I get to get a pawn to d5. So when you're in a worse position, generally you want to try to play dynamically to try to get out of that position. It's rare, like if you're statically worse, you can play statically and hope to get back in the game. You usually have to complicate. You have to make a point to take smart risks, if that makes sense. Like take risks where you're almost playing off your opponent's emotions of wanting to stabilize the game and win smoothly. And you're saying, hey, I'm not going to allow you to do that. I'm going to create some problems. I'd rather go down swinging and force you to make some tough decisions to win then just let you roll over me, but the game lasts another 20 moves beyond where the game might have ended if you had played dynamically and it backfired. So that's how I would recommend thinking when you're down in material. There will be cases where it's okay to play a little more defensively for a time period, but you don't want to play passively for too long when you're behind in material. So, yeah, I think knight e5, rook c1, castles, all those look a little better. I was pretty happy after this. I still thought knight e5 was interesting here. Trying to play for complications, but this looks similar. Again, though, I can't really hope to take and get an advantage because my knight's under attack. And if I move here, white's taking on d5, and this is a complete reversal. White gets the pawn back. Bishop takes c4's coming. That's the effect of a move like knight e5. Like I have to be careful not to just take it and end up much worse. So instead, white castled. I played bishop b4. I was kind of torn here. Again, I wasn't happy about having to potentially give my bishop for the knight. But that was my plan. Like, had white played, let's say, knight d2 now, attacking here, I was probably going to play bishop takes c3. Take, and then either b5 or maybe knight a5. Is there something wrong with b5? b5, rook b1, a6, a4. Okay, and white can immediately start undermining. Again, instructive move there, a4. I don't want to take because then white wins the c4 pawn. And if white just played something like rook e1 or h3 or something, I get to castle, connect the rooks, maybe bring a rook over to the b file, try to punch through over here at some point. Much easier to consolidate. But a4, like hitting me and attacking the structure before I have a chance to connect my rooks and secure my king, much more disruptive. So there's this window of time white has to create counterplay, and if they miss that window, they're going to lose this game probably. But even being down one pawn, if they get that window right, they can make it complicated and maybe claim compensation. So there are some lines where if white went after c4, I was going to play that way, and then knight a5. I guess it stands to reason I could play knight a5 without bishop takes c3 as well. But I thought it'd be kind of nice to block the c file so the rook couldn't join in attacking that pawn. Okay, but instead, white took on d5. I took with the e-pawn. Knight e5, castles. Again, we're not going to take the knight. We take the knight. The pressure on my knight and the pawn here is too annoying. I forfeit all my advantage with a lot of interest, too. Plus 2.5 or more for white. So just castle. Yeah, and I really didn't like this next move, knight g4. I felt it was too routine, once again. That trade doesn't accomplish a whole lot for white. I guess white was trying to loosen my grip on the d5 square, trying to trade off one of the defenders, but this is too slow of a plan. White doesn't have enough pieces to follow up on a plan like that. Yeah, taking here, I think makes some sense. I think I was mentioning like taking in b3. I think I still stand by that suggestion. Looks decent. Maybe g4, trying to alpha zero style start pressing with the pawns on the king side. Maybe make my knight move eventually. But at least b3, a structure like this. I think I have to watch these pawns for the foreseeable future. It might even be better to play this c3 move, which would have been perhaps a tough call because that pawn looks a little extended. But white plays knight g4. My keyboard is dying. Great. All right. Knight g4. Happy to trade the knights. Yeah, I wonder if rook f8 is a slight inaccuracy. Maybe this was more accurate because then I don't have to worry about bishop d7 at all. So, yeah, the engine actually does say rook f8, slight inaccuracy, but I think we're almost splitting hairs here. But I probably should not have even allowed this potential idea. And then like the b3 thing again. Breaks up the pawns. This pawn being backward is the most annoying thing about this whole line. But white played bishop f3, rook a d8, and I think this is a technically winning position. My plan would be to advance my queenside pawns carefully, keeping everything defended. Maybe target d4 rather. So you'll remember I ended up playing the bishop back to f8. And one idea, can't remember if I mentioned it in the game, but I briefly thought like, well, if things slow down here, maybe I'll play g6, bishop g7, and have my knight and my bishop firing at d4, just to force white to play one of their rooks to d1 again. So I might do something like that, combined with pushing the queenside pawns carefully. Maybe knight b4, attacking d3 and a2. That's probably why white played a3 here, actually, trying to stop knight b4. But more so, I'd be looking to just get those pawns up the board and do something with my dark square bishop. So, yeah, a3, I played this b5 move, looks good. And b4, probably the last mistake that white can tolerate here. Position's already looking grim, but that does make things easier. Yeah, they probably got to sit tight. Something like g3, just create some luft around the king. And I think I probably would have done this. I might have some position like this. And I have various ideas I can play with here. Knight a5, knight b3, a5, b4. Just always keeping d5 defended, keeping everything nice and tight. Maybe in some universe, knight e7 to f5, pressuring the bishop and the pawn. But eventual goal, use that queenside majority. That's where the advantage really lies, the 4 versus the 3. But b4, and we get this undermining move, a5. White's defenses on b4 are overwhelmed. And if takes, I mentioned bishop takes a3. I think that should be pretty nice. Again, just got to watch the a pawn, but two connected pawns like this, that's going to be too strong. So white tried bishop d2. I captured on b4, then took d4. I think this is also a good move. Bishop takes b4. If I take with the knight, I guess I said all captures are good. I should probably retract that statement because there is rook b1 at the end of this line. And white not only wins the b pawn in this line, but like say I go bishop c3, the d5 pawn may fall as well. And then all of a sudden, with a couple inattentive decisions by me, we're in a rather tough opposite colored bishop endgame. When I was mentioning minor piece trades and how I would have liked to trade dark square bishops and play with knight versus light square bishop, this is kind of what I mean, because I'd want to avoid an opposite color bishop situation by all means, because even with a pawn extra, those can be drawish. Still looks like a tough slog for white, but they have way more chances to draw here than they ever even hinted at in the game. So we're just being vigilant about that too. Yeah, so take d4, hit the knight, or hit the bishop, hit the e2 square. And this is just a cleanup job at this point. Just trade. Get the rook in. Yeah, and white dropped the bishop. But even had they played rook fd1, was probably going to go d4 here. Start motoring in the center. And just a matter of time before these pawns decide the game. All right, so thanks again to my opponent. If you see elements of your own play from the white side in an opening like this, know that that's very common. And hopefully from the black side, if you play the Caro-Kann, you picked up a thing or two. Getting these knights out, and if white plays this Panov Attack c4, kind of understanding what's going on. Like, the pin can be appealing in this position, this bishop g4 line, but there is theory here, leads to this long possibility with c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3. That is the, I'd say, most important thing you have to be vigilant about if you bring your light square bishop out when your opponent has already moved their c pawn, is that queen b3 is on the table, attacking d5 and b7. So always make note of that. Even with bishop e6, it's not like I can close my eyes to the queen b3 possibility. It's not impossible to deal with this, but I'm actually kind of curious what the engine suggests here. Has this been played before? Yeah, in a few games. Knight a5 played, d takes c4. So even here, white could think about it. Knight a5 does look like a good reply. d5 is pretty secure. But I don't know. Maybe something worth exploring. Whoa, look at this line. C takes d5. This might have to be a topic for a future. Whoa. Surprise at the end of the analysis. Those of you who stick around for the analysis, you get to witness brilliancies. Give the queen, because I guess I was just riffing here, but I guess this happens in this line. Knight e5 is a great move. Yeah, and black's going to have to allow the capture on d7. So just do be cautious about the queen b3 move. And I'm going to look at this line, actually, because now I'm curious about it. All right. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. This was climbing the rating ladder and getting in a Caro-Kann game today, guys. All right. Thanks for watching.